Hi, I'm Rishabh, and here's a guide on how to approach a competitive programming question. So you may have looked at a competitive programming question and think, it's confusing, or I don't even know where to start, which is how you're supposed to feel at the start. But in reality, you probably know all the information you need to know for the question, and you just don't know how to apply it. And there's some steps that you should take when approaching a competitive programming question, so you don't, lead yourself in the wrong direction, especially when you're getting started. And there's no courses you can take to get better at competitive programming. The only real way, just like a lot of things in life, is just practicing. There obviously is some for later stuff. There's some specifics you need to learn. But that's for lower levels. Then the only way to get better is practicing. So I recommend watching this video, even if you know how to solve competitive programming questions, but just to get guidance on maybe if you're messing something up or just not approaching it the right way. This might help. So let's first talk about what you need to know. So what you need to know beforehand, right? Let's just say you need to know how to code, right? So you can code in Python, Java, or C++. So for higher levels, C++ is the best, but you can get everything done with Python or Java. So I think learning Python or Java, if you haven't learned anything before, is better. So this video, I'll be explaining a Python, but I'll do pseudocode and stuff, so even Java people or C++ people can follow along. Other languages like script, JavaScript, and don't really work as well because they don't have as sophisticated object systems. So what do you need to know for coding? So you may think oh, I need to know all these things for to solve any question, but you don't. In reality, you really need to know basics. You should. So for any of these languages, you should understand all the way up to strings and arrays. That's assuming you have to understand looping, um, data types, right? These are the things you really need to understand. And if you know how to code like this, you should be able to solve most beginner level programming questions. You just need to know how to apply this, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So with strings and arrays, you need to understand what they are, how they work, and maybe some basic functions that you can apply. For strings, you understand dot split and other basics. Arrays dot index, etc., or just indexing in general with brackets. And so there's a billion different functions that you can use on computer programming or any programming in general. And you're no way you're gonna learn them all. So the only real way is by just doing practice questions. And while you're doing practice questions, just looking them up and understanding and learning new things on the way. Look at how can I do this faster? Let me look up and find a Stack Overflow post, and that'll give you some cool function to make your job easier. So after this is beforehand. So that's all you need to know up to strings and arrays. And there's plenty of ways you can learn this. Plenty of online resources. I've given some. Pretty much anything that takes you this far. And even if you don't understand it that well, you can still get started by just looking at doing practice problems because you'll just get better along the way. For me, it took me a while to break into computer programming, but it just takes some practice. So I would say, okay, first now you're given a problem. Let's say we're gonna talk about the problem that was for contest one of ACSL Junior, or it is actually the same that was for intermediate and senior, which is kind of funny. So which means this is hard stuff for middle schoolers especially. This is high school level stuff, the same stuff that you give in high schoolers. So first, you see a question. Okay, the first thing is just read and understand the question. Understand. This is important. Understand. Don't try to go into solving without understanding. This should be the easiest part. Your easy part should be understanding, right? Because if you don't understand it properly and you start coding, you will go nowhere. Read this question multiple times. Understand what it's asking. So okay, you can pause and read it. So basically, but I'll just summarize it. So basically, you'll be given 5 values, each one corresponding to one of these boxes here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And each of these values has a number value. So this is worth what's it? 5, 3, 2, 1, 1. Fibonacci numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay, and they'll give you the color value of each one, and based on the colors, you have to create you have to tell them the sign. So it tells you exactly what these colors mean. So let's say there's going to be a value. They're going to give me 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. So for each of these, they're going to give colors. So let's say it's it can be blue, red, or green, or white. Okay, so it says what it says here. Red squares are for hours, and green squares are for minutes. Right? So to understand the question better, we can look at their example and just see exactly, the process that goes on. So right now we have a 1 as white, A 1 is red, a 2 is green, the 3 is blue, and 5 is green. Okay. So now let's look what's next. So it says red squares are used to represent only hours, right? So now let's start thinking about how we're going to solve for this time. So this is like, you guys should try to understand. I'm not really explaining all in detail this problem. I hope you guys just like look at it and understand. But so now we're trying to find the time using these associations. The associations in a value 1 with W. Oh, sorry, this is supposed to be red. Right, all these associations, now we're going to make a time. So now it's saying hours are red, right? So now we look here. This is how you're supposed to interpret this problem. We look here, all the red squares, we have 1. We have a value of 1 red square. So we're going to add 1 here. Green squares represent minutes. So let's go to minutes. Green squares, so we have 1, 2. So this is 2 and 5, so it's 7, right? And so now we have blue squares are represented to use hours and minutes. So what does that mean? Like, this may be kind of confusing, but you should this is why you should always just test these, and so you can really understand exactly what's going on. So all this means is that any blue values will be applied to both hours and minutes. So we just add this 3 to both hours and minutes, so plus 3, plus 3. So now we know we have hours at 10 and minutes at 10. Okay, next. Oh, sorry, this is 4. 4 and 10. Next, it says white squares are ignored, so this doesn't matter. So now we have 4 hours, 4 in the H, 10 in the M. So now, how do we calculate like a time? Right, these are just numbers. So it says to find the current minutes, multiply the values of green and blue squares and multiply by 5. So we have, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but green and blue squares is what I added for minutes. This is green, this is blue, and multiplied by 5. So times 5 equals 50 minutes. Okay? And then what does it say? Okay, it doesn't mention exactly how to find the red, but I think you're supposed to just assume that this is just hours, right? So 4 hours. So now we know the time is 4 hours, 50 minutes. Right? There are some edge cases and things we'll talk about in a second, but this is just the basic understanding of how this problem is meant to be thought about. Okay, so now we read and understand the problem. Understand it's big. Okay, we understood it. We know and now we should write pseudocode. Pseudocode is like pretty much planning our code. This is everything so far can be like understood in any language right now. Pseudocode can be understood in any language. It's just how you're gonna plan out your code. You don't necessarily have to do this, but it may make your life easier if this kind of thinking helps. So let's think. So in the actual problem, let's look at the sample input, sample output. Okay. 5 sets of data. So each one is like one test case. There's one like clock, one instance of the clock. So we're going to be getting. Let's just think about this. So they're telling us the value for each of these squares. So what we have to do is assign these in our code. We have to assign each of these. So they're going to give it to us. They're just going to tell us the numbers as R, W, G, B, G. So now we have to, like before, we have to make our H and we have to make our M. So let's just say H equals the value of all G's, so let's say the summation. This is just this all this means is the sum of all of them. Value of what is it? Is reds, right? So of reds plus value of blues. Then we could say minutes equals value of, this just means sum of all, so sum of all the value of greens plus sum of all value of blues, right? Just like we did before. And so we think about how we're going to code this in a second, or when we get to coding, I'll talk more about that. So now we're here. Now we have an H and an M, right? And so actually we want our minutes. Remember, like I said, it's a value of greens plus blues times 5. So we're just going to multiply this all by 5. Right, so now we have minutes and h in minutes. But the problem is, what if minutes is 60? Right? If it's 60, then I can't say, I can't say it's 460. That's not, that's not normal. So I think it mentions this later in the oh, actually, that's not part of this question. I forget what I said. I guess we can tackle this anyway. So let's say the minutes is 60, right? We can't have time saying 460. So what we want to say is um, if m equal to 60, or we can say greater than or equal to just in case. Let's say, yeah, greater than or equal to. Then we say, or just say equal. Then, when it's 60, we take this out, we make this 0, and we add 1 to the front, right? That's what we're going to do. We're going to say h plus equals 1, right? Which is the same as saying h equals h plus 1, and m equals 0, right? Now what if let's say what if h is 13? All right? We say it's 1260. Cross this out, comes 0, comes 13. Well, we can't have 13 because remember after 12 it goes to 1. So what do we say if h equals 13? H equals 0. H equals 1, sorry. That's it, because we just want to reset it back to 1. So now that we've written pseudocode and understand the question, I'm going to show you how to exactly apply this and actually solve it. So in real HackerRank, it's a little different. Like you don't have to worry about like inputs. You don't have to worry about like input, etc. They just have it all in for you. So that it's going to look like this. It's going to look like C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, right? Because there's 5 colors. Those are the 5 inputs that we saw earlier. Like remember, the 5 inputs were like W, R, G, G, B, G, something like that, right? So instead, you don't have to worry about this. In real HackerRank, they literally just put them all in variables for you. But unfortunately, I don't have access to the HackerRank thing right now, so I will just show you like here. So first, we have these 4 values, right? We have these W, R, G, B, G, B. Okay. The first thing we did was we found an H and M, right? We said H and M are equal to something. Right? We said H and M are equal to minutes, right? So we could say, so we want to say, let's say we want to go through each and every one of these, and if it's W, we don't worry about it. If it's R, then we want to add it to H, right? If it's G, we want to add it to M, and if it's blue, then we add it to both. Right? This is just a reiteration of what we worked through, and when we understand the question, and I'm just explaining exactly how you would do what I said was add the values of all the reds and add the values of all the greens. And so, how you do this? So how I did this, there's pretty much infinite ways of doing this. So you can say for, let's say, color let's create an array with all of these. So this is like called array iteration, right? This is something you should understand. In Java, it would look more like for I int I equals 0, I less than r dot length I plus plus, right? And then you would iterate through the array. You'd say array dot of I. But in Python, it's a lot easier. I can say for color in this, and I can just say the variable instead of saying, array dot I or something. So either way works. I'm just explaining that this is array iteration. So I'm going to iterate through each of these colors. So I say for color in C1, C2, 3, for color in this array, which means it's just going to go through all these colors one by one. So let's say if color, let's say equal to green, right? Then I want to add it to minutes. So I say min equals, I'll say min plus equals G, or sorry, plus equals color, right? Which is the same as saying m equals m plus color. So all this is doing is adding this color to the value of m, right? So, which is minutes. And since it's green, we want to add it to minutes. So let's say if the color is red, then we want to add it to h. So I'm just going to make it concise. Plus equals color. I say if color equal to blue, then we want to add it to both. So we say plus equals color and plus equals color. Sorry. And then if it's equal to white, well, we don't really have to do anything. So I don't necessarily have to do this. I can say pass, or we can just like leave this. Right, so what I did so far. So they gave me all these colors, right? W is in C1, R is in C2, G is in C3, B is in C4, G is in C5. Right, and I'm saying for each one of these colors, if it's equal to G, then I add its value to H. And yes, I instantiate these before for adding to it. So I'm going to say H equal to 0, M equal to 0, right? So now I'm adding all these. So I've iterated through all of them, right? So now let's go like this. Let's say print H M. So what this does, it's like, so when you're coding, you want to like make sure you don't go too far without checking for mistakes. So I'm gonna right now check if this is all working as intended, right? So, oh sorry, did I get this name? Define solve. Oh shoot. Okay. And so now I want to see if this works. I'm gonna run solve with these variables. Let's just type them in. Oh, what is this? I fixed it. Okay. These variables. So right now I'm solving it with these variables, and I want to see if it prints an H and M, which are like in hours and minutes, which are reasonable. So let's see. Oh, this has to be consistent. Okay, so now we have an error. It says unsupported operand type int and string when we do H plus color. So what happened? Let's think about what happened when I ran this code. So when here, I ran here, these variables replaced these. Okay, so it said for color and this, and all these colors, it's going to do all these. So first it's going to say for color in C1 is equal to W since it's the first one, right? C1, W, C1. So it's going to say for color in this array, C1's first. If color is in G, is it color R? Is it color B? None. Going to go next. Now we're going to say C2. C2 is equal to R, so it's going to say if color is G, it's not G. If the color is R, which is R, then do this. Do H plus equals color. Right, so that makes sense. You know, everything's working. We're at that line. H plus equals color. But now it's saying unsupported operand type, int and string. So what this means is that H has been instantiated as an integer. You know, I've given it a number. Integer is just like a whole number, right? So this data type is integer. But I'm trying to add a color to it. I'm trying to add plus color, which I'm just trying to add R. I can't add the letter R to a color, right? And that makes sense. You know, I'm not trying to add the color. I'm trying to add like the Fibonacci, right? I'm trying to add that Fibonacci number based on what it's representing. So I want to add 1, 1, 2, 3, or 5. So how are we going to make it so that based on, you know, I want to add, instead of color itself, I want to add one of these numbers. So this is like probably the hardest part of the question. Like, how am I going to do this? So what we can say, so we know that this first number has a box value of 1. This second number has a box value of 1. 2, 3, and 5. Right, so let's say, so if I'm adding R, and it's the first, well, in this case it's the second one, and it's C2, then instead of adding R, instead of adding this color R, I want to add the value of 1. Like, let's say R was in this third box, then I would add 1, add 2. But so it's different every time. So how am I going to make it so that, no matter what box R is in or what cell R is in, I can add the proper thing? So if you've thought about this, I hope you can think of something, but this is kind of challenging. So here's what I thought to do. So what I did is I created an array, or actually, I created an array. Let's call it Fibonacci. And I listed all the Fibonacci numbers that apply to this question. And I said, if color is equal to G, I want you to see where in this array is it. So let's say G is in the, third one. So it's in the third one. And I want you to say it's in the third one. Go up, see what the value of that third one is, which is 2, and then add that. Right now, I don't want you to add just color. I want you to add the corresponding value. So let's say R, right? R is the second one. I want you to go up to this array and see the second value, which is 1. Right? And I want you to pause and really understand why I'm doing that. Kind of a poor explanation, I'm sorry. But this is how I'm going to think of it. So how would I do that? So I'm going to say m plus equals Fibonacci of some index. So how do I know what index? Here's where a pretty useful function comes in to play. I'm going to explain this in a simpler way without using this function, but this is a really useful function. It's called enumerate. Enumerate color. Oh, sorry. Let's enumerate here. Sorry. Now I'll talk about a Java equivalent or a way to do this without in a second, but this is just a really cool function that you want to try, that you might want to know. So what this does is that normally when you're saying color, you're just saying color for this, right? But now I want two values. I want the index and the color. So what this does is that enumerate will output two values instead of just the one C1. It's going to output the index comma the value itself. So now I have two values. So if I print index comma color, I'll just write that up for now. Right, it's using 0W, 1R. It's telling me this index and this value and this color. So I'm going to say if the color is equal to G, I want to say M plus equals Fibonacci index. So it's doing, so it's G, it's going to tell me, so let's say G is in this third one. At one point I'm at G, right? And it's C3. So it's like, okay, is the color G? Yes, the color is G. Now I want to say, let's add Fibonacci at the same point where G is. So G's in the middle, or G's in value 0, 1, 2. I'm going to say 0, 1, 2. Here, this is assuming you understand indexing and arrays. So now let's go here. Let's do the same thing. Fibonacci index. Fibonacci index. Fibonacci index. Right, so all it's doing is just going to do the corresponding value. So now let's try it. 4 and 10. Yeah, so now we're printing 4 and 10. Well, that's not right. That's not the time. The time's not 410. If you remember, this is the same one from the first example where the answer is 450. That's because we forgot to do times 5. Because it told us to do times 5, like we talked about in pseudocode. M times 5, so now this should work. 450. Nice. So now we have to be able to print this in a way that's acceptable. So it wants like a colon between them. So it's gonna say, we can say 450. Like they want us to print it like this. And the way we can do that is just by saying H plus colon plus M. There's way cooler ways of doing this, way simpler, way easier to read ways, which you can do by searching up, figure out by searching up. Right now this is the basic way. It's just gonna add. It's gonna say H plus the colon. Oh, we have to turn this into a string actually. All this does is makes it a string instead of a number. So now it's gonna print 450. Well, okay, so now let's try a different test case. We have to make sure this works for all test cases. Let's try third test case on the worksheet, which is BGBBR. BGBBR. And it tells us the answer on the right. Oh wait, okay, yeah, so that also works. But actually, the first one didn't even work. I just realized. We're outputting 450, but the sample output is actually doing 0 450. Like it's actually, we're printing 450, but the correct answer should be 0 450. So how can we do that? How can we fix this? So we can say if H is less than 10, so which means it's only going to be one digit, we want a 0 in front of it, right? Then we could say H is equal to 0 plus H. So all I did was add a 0 to the front of it. If it's less than 10. If it's less than 10, there's only one digit, right? So we add a 0 to the front of it, so it makes 2 digits. And actually, this is the same thing with the minutes. We have to fix this with minutes as well. So we say, and we can just copy paste the same code. If minutes less than 10, we can just say m equals minutes equals 0 plus m. So let's try this. 0 450, exactly the number we wanted. So now we have a working solution. There is the thing we talked about, how if it's 60 minutes, then we want to lower it, that's actually not part of this problem. So I'm just gonna keep this as short as possible. I'm just not gonna mention that. But so now I'll explain how to solve this maybe without Fibonacci, or without this enumerate. Okay, so how else would we solve this if we didn't know things like enumerate, or couldn't exactly think of that idea? So if you've heard of dictionaries, you can think about that for a second, or think about how you'd use dictionaries to solve it. But this is like what I call or what it's called a brute force method. Well, the other one's brute force, but this is more brute force because I'm individually coding each scenario. So here's what I did. I said for each one, so let's say it was C1. If C1 is equal to R, add 1, G, B, or you can try to understand this. Basically, we know that C1, or the first one, always has a Fibonacci of 1, then 1, then 1, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 5, right? Okay, whatever. And so then I just said, if it's the C4th one, then we do 3. If it's the C5th one, then we do 5, right? I just brute force did exactly instead of using a for loop. So this 100% works. If you cannot think of a way of using for loops and all, this obviously works, but this is not ideal. As you get better, you want to be able to make your code more concise and be able to think of it in ways with using loops. So basically, that's it. So now, what you would do is you would test all the test cases they give you, see if they give you, or the test inputs, see if they give you the sample outputs, and if they do for all of them, then test it, or search for problems. Like if you're having problems in your code, I recommend just rereading the question. There's so many times where I just there's little details in the question that I just ignore, and I spend so much time trying to debug it and it doesn't work. And yeah, so if you want to get better, I think you should just practice more. I'm sorry, I'll make a better video, a better guide later, a more concise, more planned out one. But I just want to quickly get this video out to help you guys.